Um, I would like to welcome all of you on Zoom, which is the bane of our existence at this point. It allows us to, on the one hand, reach out and have Mohamad Hamouie join us from Lebanon, while at the same time we can see each other, we can see him face to face, and we cannot engage in the kind of wonderful public meeting that typically these lectures happen in the context of. I would like to begin the first lecture of the year, and the first lecture of my deanship, which is also quite significant, by saying a few words about Mohamad, whom I met in Spain a year ago when we're both lecturing for as part of the seminar for the Manzano Prize proceedings in the fall of 2019. I enjoyed his work, and I thought at that point it'd be important to have him come and speak to us. And I got the chance of doing so, and as dean now, and I'm absolutely thrilled that he is here with us today. He was born in Beirut in 1959. I'm telling you this not because I want to expose his age, but because I want you to understand him in terms of his generation as an architect and the time in which he actually went to school, probably 20 years later, I would imagine, and therefore at what point in the development of architectural education in the world he was educated within. He is Lebanese. He's a Lebanese architect, and he has worked very, very much on the traditional architecture of his home region, as much also as the architecture of other places, both in the Middle East and North Africa. He graduated with a degree in architecture from the American University of Beirut, and he was appointed as assistant professor there, where he taught Lebanese traditional architecture. He has become, over the last 20 years, one of the most important practitioners and leaders of new traditional architecture in the Middle East. So he's very smart because he is clearly a classicist and a vernacularist working within the cultural and religious traditions of Islam and his country and the region. He is currently a professor of practice and the director of the Institute of Islamic Art and Architecture at the Lebanese American University in Beirut School of Architecture and Design. We're extraordinarily honored to have him be with us today, and we're looking forward to his presentation and to discussion following, and also to his continuing contact with the school. Thank you, Mohamad, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Stefanos. This would be my first presentation in the USA. We are now midnight in Beirut, and this reminds me 37 years back when I used to be late in my presentation and due dates, and we used to do overnights. So thank you, Stefanos, of recalling those days where we have to stay late at the studio and doing our own homework. I'll be, in my presentation, it'll be in 4 parts. The first part, like Stefanos was mentioning, I'll be speaking about my early formation as a person and as an architect. And then during the architectural years, I had this change in mentality because we were taught modernism, and I had to understand the traditional city and architecture in the area I lived in. So I started my own research. This would be the second part of the presentation. And thirdly, I've selected 6 works, 3 on architectural projects and 3 on the urban projects. During the course of my career, I designed more than 400 buildings. 2/3 of them have been built. And lastly, I'll be speaking about the building technique and crafts and I use in my architecture. So I would start sharing the presentation. I've selected the title Crafting Architecture because this is the title of a book I'm working on now. And this explains the way I'm working with and mastering the architecture, I've been introduced to in the traditional way. My early formation, I've been fortunate to grow up in one of the traditional cities in Mount Lebanon. The city is pierced in a mountain overlooking the Mediterranean. This is an old photo. Deir al-Amar, which is in English, the Monastery of the Moon. It's a town that have been built by people who came as far as Yemen, and they have, during the Islamic era, have moved to the Gulf, then Iraq, Syria, and then settled in Lebanon. They have established little emirates during the Ottoman, and then emirs at that time have been introduced to the east and the west. The last of them have traveled to Tuscany, and he was in partner with the Medici family, and he got also techniques of construction which have been adapted later in that city. This photo is an early photo where still the Italian influence didn't take shape in that city. Deir al-Amar, this is the photos I took recently. Deir al-Amar have shaped me as a person. I've lived there because my father was the governor in Mount Lebanon, and we moved from the capital and lived in that beautiful city. That city had taught me a lot of things innate. I understood spaces, proportions, and materiality innate without being acquainted to anything called architecture. My parents, they're either, lawyers or traders, and none of them introduced me to architecture. I didn't know what architecture is. Since I had this capability of drawing caricatures, I wanted to draw building. I didn't understand the word architecture. Later in my years, I studied, like Stefanos was saying, in Beirut during the 1980s. And at the time, it was fashionable to teach modern, and I've been introduced to modernism. And during the course of my education, I was struck between the spaces and atmospheres I've been acquainted as in my early childhood, and what was promoted as progress in terms of the international style. That conflict of things made me a bit confused. Other than living in Lebanon, I was fortunate also to travel all the way by caravan every year in summer with my parents via Damascus, Istanbul, Athens, all the way to Venice, and then split. At time we go down to Rome, at time we go to Spain, another time we go to Paris and to England and Vienna. So I had this formation of seeing different cultures and being acquainted to different architecture as far as I was 9-year-old. And what triggered in me to rediscover those spaces is that I felt a bit confused when I was taught at the university that we have to design by conceptual methodology, and I haven't clearly understood what concept is. And at the time I start understanding that theory is very important in designing, I turned back to those old cities that I've visited that were stuck in my heart. And I tried to change a bit this understanding. As early as in my 3rd year, I started doing some research on the places I have lived in and visited. and started sketching and taking a measurement, drawing, redrawing plans, elevations, perspectives in order to understand those proportions and ratio in order to grasp. So basically those buildings were my main teacher. At this year, in my third year, I started being acquainted with what the Prince Charles was doing in Europe, and traveling to England almost every year. I used to go to the Zamana Library, which is in front of the Victoria and Albert Museum, and grab books from the Aga Khan Foundation, which at the same pace of the Prince Foundation were doing series and talks about how to promote the traditional way of thinking and the traditional way of doing things. And this is where I've followed them. It wasn't fashionable at that time to see magazines or books or monographs speaking that language. You have to go and search with them in those libraries. And my main person that I looked up during those years is Hassan Fathy. But at the same time, I was very much interested in Louis Barragan's work, the way he abstracted the architectural language of his own town in Mexico and worked on it. So it was going between the vernacular of Hassan Fathy and the contemporary approach of understanding the language of the city of Louis Barragan that I was really trying to understand where I was going. So basically I was sketching during the whole courses, starting the third year, drifting away from the program. I still had to do what the teachers wanted us to do, but I did my own mini research at the site to understand the architectural vocabulary in our home area. When I say home area, I've enlarged that place. It became spanning from Samarkand, Bukhara, Khiva, all the way to Andalusia. Unfortunately, at the time, those places were not very much exposed by architects or researchers. It was more historic and descriptive books. But nevertheless, I tried to read between the lines how those communities have developed and made such beauties of cities. So learning from the Medina, at the first glance, for the people who are not acquainted with the Arab Islamic cities, those cities from an aerial view or from looking at their morphology, one would think it's quite chaotic the way it's been planned. And that's what I've felt the first time I was looking at those cities. Yet, I was struck by the similarity of those cities that spans 2 continents, and they had basically the same logic of growth. And researching deeply, I found out a lot of common denominators, which is due to culture and different socioeconomic, and they have common history and common religion. And I wanted to dig down deeper to understand how those cities were formed, which are different in a way from the modern cities. Now that I understand their growth, I don't feel that they're so much alienated from the traditional cities that were occurring in Europe, but it's just that different culture expresses in a different ways. I started reading and taking notes. Those are some of my 10 to 12 notebook. I used to read and write whatever I was understanding from those researches. And in my third year, my parents gave me the opportunity to do a house for my sister and myself on the rooftop of a building in Beirut overlooking the Mediterranean. So that was my first project in my third year as a student. And I wanted to do a courtyard house. I mean, the living areas overlooks the Mediterranean, but from the family space, those two family rooms connect into a courtyard. That was quite abstract, and the way I wanted to detail the buildings. I did a lot of mistakes, but I have learned from those mistakes. Later on, as a professional, I established my practice in the Gulf, and I continued my research and those type of medinas. I'll be speaking very generally about this in a very analytical way. The Medina, as any traditional city, is a fortified place, and it has gates. The common denominator between those cities, that the gates goes in the middle till the city center, where the public buildings and mainly the Grand Mosque is located. All the main arteries of the city are souks. We call them bazaar, like the ones happening in Istanbul and in Fes, and many arteries that goes into pockets of housing. So this is all a pedestrian city. At that time, just like simple carriages that can go in. And looking at those cities, it's quite fascinating for me, because the public realm of the places are both for the public and the private. So the person who occupies the house works on the outside of the house. So you would have seating, staircases, it's bridging on top of between a place to another place. So the public and private sector is combined together in a very executive way. Also studying some of the formation of public and private buildings. Most of the buildings are introvert, and the size of the courtyard dictates the nature of the building. Even the gardens have been fortified from outside, so it's like a fortified wall, and within it you have the greenery. Later, people have looked at them as recalling paradise. The interesting thing about those buildings is when us as architects, we look at north, east, south facade, we're looking at where it's facing, but actually in courtyards, the north facade is the inner facade of the wall that's facing north, but it's from the inside. So that courtyard is the main space of the house or the main space of the public building. And it's defined by its size and also defined by climate. So we have cool courtyards and we have hot courtyards. In cooler places like in the Mediterranean, courtyards used to tend to be larger in size because you want to have sun to go into them. But in hot and arid areas, courtyards are quite narrow with high walls in order not the sun to penetrate to the floor of the courtyard. The direction of the courtyard are very essential. So you have those large spaces which are called E1. We have the summer E1 and the winter E1. The summer E1 is basically towards the north because you don't want the sun to get in. The winter E1 usually is directed south, at times in east and west, just to get the sun to go into the courtyard. Another main features that I have learned from those cities is that those are designed inside out. In our architecture profession, we're basically looking at the masses and designing things from outside, the way they look from outside. The modernists have expressed by some saying of Le Corbusier, it's a sculpture that takes the sun and the shades, and they looked at building as a machine for living, where those cities have taught me that things grow typologically. So when we're looking at the city from far away, we can recognize the mosque, the church, the civic places, and the private areas. Another thing that also was fascinating for me is that those cities have a very strong growth. They're organic, but at the same time, they're very rational. Looking at those cities from top, you see all courtyards are very much geometric. They're either square or rectangle, and the deformation occurs on their periphery. So the city grow naturally, but every single component of the city has a very formal understanding and structure. And the interesting things that types in those city grows with relationship to other cultures and understanding the timing where it has been designed. But variation occurs on a very small rhythm. This is the city of Aleppo. It's a stone city. You can see all the roads are. You cannot look at the formation of the city as individual buildings put together. It's like one big agglomeration, wall to wall, between public and private sector. At the bottom, you would see 3 different courtyards of 3 different houses. Each have a certain characteristic, and yet they complement each other. In our understanding of the modern world, people would like to do different forms to express different buildings as monuments. But when we look at the details of those international style buildings, their details are very much similar. In the traditional city, types of building look the same, but the variation occurs on the element, on the detail, rather than on the overall massing of the projects. Finally, I was very much amazed by 2 areas, Andalusia and Venice. Those 2 areas is where East meets West. And this is where the formal and the informal, the structured, the mind and the hearts comes together. And in those areas, 2 different cultures dialogue with each other. They don't make any collision. And people in those areas understood the relationship of how to communicate with each other. The Venetian people were traders. They have visited the East all the way to Istanbul, Damascus. They have learned from them. In their fabric, there is the Damascus fabric, which is taken from the textiles of Damascus, and the same with Andalusia. So those places have basically kept me going in architecture and make me to think architecture and the way you approach them. I'm going to the third part. I'm selecting 3 projects. The first project is my last project that I've did in my hometown in Lebanon. It's in the Bekaa Valley. This is a retreat. The valley, the architectural language of the valley of Bekaa is mainly made out of mud brick, sun-dried earth, and dried stone construction. It's a very simple rectangular house, and some of them, or most of them, are courtyard houses with low walls. The project that I'm trying to do, I started with the phase 1, which is the small residence, and hoping that it becomes like a training center for the arts and crafts. That project is it's another courtyard houses using natural material from the area. The basalt is coming from Syria, but the plaster is the same plaster that they used to do before, lime plaster, and using natural material. Dry stone construction, and the courtyard. Things have changed. The old Damascus house had one fountain in the middle. Here we've made a pool, and this will help to make the area more humid because it's a dry area. In that particular project, I have used recycled material from old houses, and I'll come to speak about those natural material done with craftsmen. My second project is a mosque in the Bay of Al Khobar. It's a very small mosque that people can go in while walking on this promenade, and also it's a typical of any courtyard mosque, but it's a very small mosque that takes 400 people during praying times. The language I'm using, and not only in this mosque but in general, is I'm trying to be a bit contemporary. So I look at the area that I work with, the MENA area, and I pick from in terms of elements from different places that I see that suits for a particular project. And that's basically what civilization used to do from the past. Craftsmen used to travel from place to place, and builders, and carry with them their own technique. And then when they settle in a certain area, they express their technique. So that if they're a good craftsman or builder, they import things. But now, since we're living in a big village, I have a wider variety to pick from. This is something that happened in the US, where the people who came from Europe brought with them their own building technique and their own character. So you have those haciendas and the formation of the fortresses that have this character that's came from the Mediterranean. So it's a simple mosque. And most of my project that I'll be explaining later, I work with craftsmen. The craftsmen in the area I work from are a bit scared to find. So in my travels, I have found the best craftsmen to do stone, like in Syria. The gypsum people I work with are craftsmen from Morocco, and the brass and woodwork are also from different places. Those craftsmen are really working the traditional way. They're hidden, so you have to go and search for them. They're not exposed. They don't have a website, and those are people who have given their craft from generation to generation, and you have to go and search for them. But I'm lucky that in the area I live in, they still exist. The third project is a desert residence. It's a fortified walled residence for a family in the middle of a palm grove. The planning concept is typical to any farming in the area of the Far East, and it has a high boundary wall made of ram earth, and then when you go inside, this will open to you that lavishness and using water, and then going inside, it's courtyarded. It has different courtyards. of different scales. It houses a reception villa and a guest villa. This is the inner courtyard. The variation that I'm doing in those courtyards, that I roof them so they become like patios, because some of the client wouldn't like to live in a space where dust will come into it. Although with high walls, dust do not occur and go into the houses. We design the architecture, engineering, and the whole interior of the place, and the furniture. And so we have, like for instance, the chandeliers coming from Murano, but we work with the craftsmen to get this blue, which is typical to the Arabic area, which is not usually used in from the people of Murano, the glass makers, because we wanted to match them with the fabric, which is also from Venice, and the zellige from Morocco. So it's like a mix of things, but it's hand-picked to make a very simple architecture. The second place, which is another reception, is the tiles and the flooring is from Tunisia, and it's a reception area for the people of the family. The three second projects that I'll be looking at are all occurring now in the Red Sea. I've selected them just to explain how we work within the historic center, or at the edge of the historic center, or we go a bit further out, and it's a competition where we are reshaping the downtown of Jeddah. Jeddah, in Arabic, it's a grandmother, and this is where the tomb of Eve is located, at the edge of the old city. Eve is basically our grandmother for all of us. It's a well-known tomb that's near the historic district. We were lucky to join urban planners and different consultants to restructure the old project of Jeddah, which is UNESCO World Heritage. And then that project we've been working on for the last 2 years. And now we are launched into 2 new areas. One is a waterfront community, very much adjacent to the Jeddah, Al-Balad, the city center. And another one that we're restructuring the formation of the downtown, of the new downtown of Jeddah, just to have those 3 areas to dialogue with each other. At the left is some old photos of Jeddah, and the right is the present condition. The buildings, they're just restored from the outside, but the whole city has been evacuated by its residents during the oil boom, and they went north and did palaces for them. And that city was frozen in time. And the Ministry of Culture now are opening to reviving the tradition of Saudi Arabia in general, whether it's Riyadh or the Red Sea. So in order to understand this place, we have made a big consortium of architects and urban planners. And for a year, almost a year, we researched the city, its character, its vocabulary, and the morphological growth of the city, because during the modern time, the city has been alienated from the water. Jeddah is the port for Mecca. And now on the front, high-rise building have taken shape, so you barely can see the city beyond the modernistic building that occurs at the waterfront. And we wanted to restructure the city in order to have the city again takes its location with respect to the Red Sea. Another thing that have occurred in the city center is that we have a big road that have scarred the city from south to north. And we're working on that particular street in order to restitch the fabric that used to be in the traditionally. In order to understand the city, we went and analyzed every single building of the city, whether the public building or the private buildings. They're different from what are used in the other part of the Arab world. They're not courtyarded, but a series of buildings will make courtyards. They're called barha. And we went and made a typological survey of all the building and also a survey of all the courtyards that are formed on the within this city, and understood the structural system. It's a couple of floors, 5 to 6 story, made out of stone and timber. What you see in front of you is building that spans almost 700 years back. We even drew buildings that have collapsed in order to understand the formation of such buildings. And our first, after we analyzed the whole city, our first task for us as an office was to start with the city center. We have renovated an old mosque, and then we've placed building along the big road that cut the city, and we, in order to make the eastern part of the city connected with the western block. So we're putting a couple of buildings and have the road be more of a service road rather than being a main road. Our studies turned that only 30% of people going from south to north go within the city. All of them crosses the city. So we are making now a bigger boulevard as the first ring road in order not to have everybody to fly inside the city and to revamp the whole city. The whole idea is to make the services up to date in order that people will come and live in that environment. So we have made an information center, a link to a cafe, and a public market, a covered marketplace, a piazza, and a small juice bar with some services. So that's the buildings that this is the cafe, and behind the kiosk we have the info center, and this is the pavilion. All the rest of the building, and we are upgrading the mosque to make its main entrance to the big piazza, the way it used to be before, because it was changed during time, and then you have to go from the back of the piazza since the road was the main determinant. So people used to come from the back. So we are restructuring the mosque to take its place to the main piazza. We have learned a lot from master builders who were still doing some renovation work. But what we're doing with them is that we are adding some newer, using new tools, new technology, using the same materials, the mangabi, which is a coral stone that they used to have for the construction. They used it as big boulders, where now we've worked on that technique where we go to the same quarry and bring the big boulders to the manufacturer who would cut the brick according to our needs. So it's either in brick size or in block size, and the arches are also cut according to our design. Cutting the blocks in such matter is easier for transportation, for laying the bricks with each other, and at the same time using minimal lime mortar in the joints. So we're using the same technique that was been used for almost 1,000 years back, but with a minor innovation. The same with the laying of timber. They're pre-designed, cut, dried in proper furnaces to last longer, but put in the same way, and the same layering of stone to wood is used like the old time. So getting this knowledge of the area, we went and drew our drawings. It's, if I can say, it's more of a shop drawing for the builders. So we're not working with the old technique of presentation where we have full set of drawing for everybody. We have a builder's drawing for the masons. And then we have each craftsman have a set of drawing whereby he can go and execute his work without looking at piles of drawing that intersect with each other. We have the same crafting technique of carving the stone or the plaster, the lime plaster, so it gives this geometric pattern. It's like a fresco in Italy. So that's the info center. Still the look have a contemporary way to it, yet the whole building technology that comes into those buildings are extremely traditional. The marketplace, which is in front in the night view, and this is center, is a place where it's like the Mercato in Florence and other places in Europe. It's an open place. It just have lights and fans to have the breeze flow through. The building material is from the area. And the same comes with the same building technique, just have a different form. The cafe, it's a 3-story, 2 and the roof. And the big wooden box in the old time is used to get the breeze in, and also the wood will take the humidity because Jeddah is extremely humid. The only thing that we are perfecting using our windows double glazed with very well sealed. The walls themselves are protective. The same with the ceiling, and the kiosk. The foundation is in stone, and the whole structure is basically in stone. One is more solid than the other, especially for the foundation. The second project that we're working on now is a mixed community very near the center. The only building which is in the area is a mosque done by Abdul Wahid al-Wakil in brick. And with this type of architecture, we try to mix both the vernacular architecture of the old Jeddah al-Balad and that building, which is a majestic building. It's a very small mosque sitting on this lot. And we're trying to understand the logic behind the formation of the Balad and their public spaces and the courtyard. So it's still the same principle that we have learned from the old town of Jeddah. We have a fish market, a school for teaching food, and this I wanted to share with Stefanos because we were speaking about some urban planning. Those are something that we're working now on them. So there, we're showing you as far as that we're showing the client what we're doing. And Jeddah al-Balad, the project now is under construction. The third project is a bit further away from the city center. So the architectural planning method and language, since it's a big area and we have all the services, the car, the metro, yet we try to have this identity of the old Jeddah in a more modern way. So we have the big harbor and the big city centers. The architectural language here, it's still classical in understanding that this is in the Red Sea, but it's a bit more modern towards expressing the vocabulary. So we have like the high pitch in using the classical formation of the old city, then a bit less in the seaside community. And then in the new Jeddah, we're working on some architectural language and in planning condition that still recalls the old city center, but in a contemporary way. My last part which is the name of the presentation, is crafting architecture. And I'll be sharing with you the way I craft my architecture, whether it's in the construction technique or use brick, stone, or working with wood, gypsum, tile, brass, and carpets. So those are taken from different projects. Just to explain to you the way we design things. In the crafting word, the way we have it in our part, craftsmen are very much stereotyped with what they have learned from their master. Only few masters go and try to perfect more what they're doing in any given material. That's what a craftsman is made to do. During our research, we look at the particular area and how those material have been put, and we try to incorporate them. But the only thing we do for those craftsmen is that we give them some tools in order to not to use their same methodology. For the construction, it's quite easy. If you have a good mason, he would understand with a very simple plans and elevation and section the way to do things. That's the beauty working with proper masons, whether it's stone, brick, woodwork, or any. It's the problem would come with the modern contractor. Because they have basically no clue using concrete and steel. It's a different type of producing things. This is a house in Bahrain. It's the same like we're doing now in Jeddah. The foundation is in stone, but we're working with fired brick. It's a very strong material for compression. If you use it properly, you would see here the staircase is and the malkaf, the wind catcher, are all done with the same material. If the earth is quite light, like in this case, the galleries, we just glaze the galleries in order not to have the brick to expose its dust. So we glaze it, we wax the glaze. But in other cases, we plaster them. Then comes the finishing material. In high-profile project where we use heavy stonework cladding, and times like on the top middle part, it's a stone with brick. So the composition, the structure is brick, and we integrate it with stone, and we produce simple drawing. Some are freehand, others are technical drawing, just for the craftsman to understand how we want these things to be done. The same with the interior drawing. It's this is like a palace, so it's heavily detailed. So we have to draw every single piece of the palace, whether the flooring, the ceiling, the chimneys, the carpentry work. The same goes with the woodwork, wood and brass. And with the gypsum work, also the craftsman will very simply come and make a stenciling of the drawings we are producing. And then he would lay it on the gyps and then start carving. It looks very difficult for us, but for those craftsmen that just put on the ladder, put music and carve like Michelangelo and do beauties of things. It's quite simple for them. Even a young apprentice at the age of 15, 18, easily can do things that not any modern artist can do. And it's just a way to direct them to get the proper feel of the whole place. Because a craftsman usually look at their own thing. It's like in the orchestra, you'll be the chief of the orchestra, but people perfect working their own instruments. Those are also from different projects, tiles from Turkey, Iznik, from Tunisia, from Morocco, Zellige. We have some writings, some in the mosque. And that's, you would see here the lady painting on the Iznik. It's, I mean, all of those craftsmen are really artists working in their jobs. Brass work, whether it's doors or chandeliers, we produce them in order to take, but most of our drawing, we basically relate on the tradition of things, and we elaborate only in sizes, height, sometime in the design pattern. We do not produce things which are alienated in order just to make a statement. We would like to have the element that we use in our project have a certain historicism in them, even if the space itself, like for instance, that's those striking color of brick domes and just simple plaster, but those simple elements makes a lot during this. Something that I wanted to mention, and the last is the painted ceilings and the carpets that we use. I wanted to say something about working with natural material and crafts. I've been in one of my trips to the Loire Valley, and a friend of us have told me something about a monastery in the area where the nuns used to do pots, and those pots are made out of clay. And an industrialist from the area wanted to reproduce the same pots. So what he did, he took those shapes of pots, which are extremely nice and handy, and reproduced them in a factory using the same material, and but they're pressed in a different structure. When a person from the neighboring area came and put the pots under the X-ray and analyzed them, he found that the energy of the pots made in from the manufacturer have the same aura, whereas the pots made by the nuns have different auras, and it's like the aura of the human being. It radiates colors from them. You understand what's the nature of that energy that's produced from those things. And to his astonishment, that the pots made in the factory have all the same aura, whereas the pots made by the nuns have different auras. At a further investigation, he discovered that a nun with a soft heart and a good past and a calm past will transmit her aura to the material she's working on. And this is the same with any sort of craft, whether it's cutting stones, handmade, even using tools, but not strong machinery, or wood, or gypsum, or any sort of material used by humans would make the space into a very particular atmosphere. And this is how, when we go into places like Old Rome, Venice, Fes, you would feel at ease and tranquility in such places, because imagining all those auras done by people in the past, they're still there, and they give you a certain tranquility that you would not find in the brutalist material used by the modern architect. Another thing that also I have learned working with brick, that in one of my houses, the client had a child who was autistic. And when we finished the house, and her child, a girl, now she graduated from Canada and she's a great artist, she becomes extremely natural, and she would walk in the house and speak even with strangers, and speaking with her mother, who was very attentive to her. That's why she traveled from the Gulf all the way to Canada to put her in a proper school. She discovered that the building we did for her in brick have the same material that's made our body from. It's earth and water mixed together with the same proportion of what earth is, with the same ingredients. So any natural material, whether it's a wood cabin, an igloo in the North Pole, or a stone or mud house in the middle of the oasis, those spaces make the person who lives in them tuned. And that's basically what I wanted to share with you. That's what I have discovered working in those natural material. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mohamad. This work is most extraordinary, and in so many ways. It's so poetic, in the compositional, in the constructive, in the decorative, in the urban, in the landscape dimensions of architecture. It is truly remarkable. Thank you.
Thank you very much
for being with us today. I'm sure there are questions. I would like to ask the first one, just to break the ice, if I could. You did speak about Venice and Andalusia, and talked about how societies can address each other in ways that are not aggressive, but they're peaceful, and they are about accommodation and understanding. How has this process occurred over these centuries and millennia in the Mediterranean? How have these cultures, over a longer period of time than the one you described, been able to speak to each other? Because there's so much, for instance, in Mosque architecture that is similar to church architecture in the north and the northern and eastern Mediterranean. How do these cultures come to talk to each other?
That's a very good question. What I know from Andalusia is that, given that you have a stable state and quite democratic among their citizens, people will dialogue with each other very softly. If you don't put any groups into a fighting mode, those people would dialogue with each other in true sincerity. And that's what happened in the past in Baghdad when they had the biggest madrasa and the school for learning before the Mughal came and burned it. And then in Alexandria, where Greeks and Egyptians were working together, centuries passed, and dialoguing with each other, and that also went all the way to Andalusia. When that's what I was saying about the philosopher, craftsman, intellect who goes from place to place and take with them their knowledge. And when they sit in that particular area, they expose and they interact with each other. I know it's very difficult for us to understand now when we're at the edge of some mini war zones. But when things get settled, people goes back to their nature as humans that coordinate with each other. I have tracked the typology of churches that have started in our area near Jerusalem, and it was in Egypt, Damascus, all the way to Turkey. The first 300 years of being put aside, and then the progress of the typology of church. The same have happened with the mosques. Those fine refinement of the construction technique and the know-how have been passed very softly. It's this last 70 years that have made us have quite a break in our urban landscape. I've been looking at in Beirut of what happened before the independence. When the French mandate came, they came quite softly, and they did do the part of the center of Beirut in a very skillful way. They have done the same in Casablanca, in Algeria, and Egypt. Unfortunately, it's with the breakthrough of modernism, like 70 years back, that we threw back all our past and we wanted to do something avant-garde. And that basically broke the chain of communication. So I understand there will be a time of turbulence and for power, but when things settle down, people would just communicate, and then you would have the rise of the builders and the intellectuals, and things will go on.
Thank you. Mary Beth, how do we handle the other questions?
There'll be a mix. So first of all, I'm going to read a text-based question. And this actually comes from Theodore, who is Dean Palazoidis' grandson, who is tuned in. And he was asking if the sketches that you displayed were done by you in the presentation.
Yeah, okay. Yes. Most of the sketches was done by me. But I'm lucky in my office that when I see a person with some talent in sketching, I come and teach him the approach. And so it's the same way, the way you teach the other apprentice. You have to pick the right person with the right talent and then let him develop this talent. And so even in those sketches, you would see some of them have some minor variation of others, but looking at them as an overall, they sit together perfectly. So yes, I started doing myself those sketches, but eventually other colleagues in the firm have been producing this with me at the same time. And this is the only way. I mean, the only way, because I have people from the Philippines, from Pakistan and India working with me in the office, from Egypt and Lebanon. The only way to understand the vocabulary is to draw it by hand. And that's why most of the people who join my firm, the first 6 to 1 year, I make them draw things. Even if they're bad, there is no problem. It's just this repetition of drawing and redrawing with the proper guidance, and everybody becomes a master. To give you another example, the problem with our educational system, I want to refer to a textbook of Saint-Exupéry, The Little Prince. It's at an early formation, every single child, when you give him a pen to draw, he's fascinated by the way he's drawing. But if you give him a Lego at an early age of 3, he's a bit frustrated, not being able to fix the Lego on top of each other. At the age of 5 to 6, a child, when you ask him to draw, all of us in the world would draw the same house, and he would draw himself, a boy or a girl, with the father, the mother, and then a chimney if he's in a cold area or not, and the tree and the sun. So we basically are tuned by heart to have the same process of formation. The problem is that with the late educational system, and all of them wants to be lawyer and businessman, the communication by drawing becomes more into writing and putting formulas, and you stop drawing at the age of 6, 7, unless for some talented teaching method where they pick those gifted children to draw till the age. The problem is that when a person reaches the first year of architectural or any design, you start reteaching this person to draw, and they're quite afraid of drawing because for maybe the last 18 years they haven't used their hand to draw. And so it's a pity, this structure about our education system, which make few of us being capable to draw like this, the drawing you have seen in front of you. And I believe any person in the world, if taught properly, can draw like this.
Do you have a follow-up question on drawing from one of our students? Sam, I'm going to unmute you so you can ask your question verbally. Are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you, Mr. Hamouie, for your inspiring and informative lecture. I also have a question about the drawings. I just wonder, how do you acquire the plans, the drawing or drafting of the plans of the buildings on site, or do you like find the plans from archives before/after visiting?
Mary Beth, can you, I'm hearing her, but I didn't quite understand the question, if you or Stefanos can.
So she was asking, how do you sketch or draft the plans of the building on site, or do you get the plans from archives before or after visiting? So what's the process for the drawings?
If we're speaking about the way we conceive the design at an early stage, we start by doing them on board. Definitely not on site, but we visit the site, and we do not do a lot of sketches when we're designing, because I have learned that understanding the traditional building typology and the pattern book that each community has, the whole idea is just to understand the community we're working in. And we refer a lot to old text and drawings by others, but we do not sketch extensively in order to reach a certain project. Most of our projects are based on type and variation on types. So we do not, wake up every, let's say, Monday morning and wanted to do something crazy and different from another job. If I would lay most of my houses, they're plus or minus very similar in concepts. They only change with the nature of the client and his demand. But all of our houses are courtyard houses, except if the land is too small, then we have to do something else. In terms of, so our first presentation are usually presented freehand. It's easy for us to change and to express what we feel. But eventually it goes into the working table, and now it's a computer. But like I was saying, we do not present our working drawing in the normal way of architects putting everything into sets. We design the sets. Some of them are for the builders, so it's a building sets. It's quite simple, and the others are the things that comes into the building process. So we have the carpentry set aside, and any form of material will be set in its own forms. If I got you right.
I think there might have been a slightly different version of this question that needs to be answered, and I think what Sam meant was, when you document things, do you document them in person, in place, or do you also, for instance, how would you do a very complex drawing of a Medina? How would you find out? How would you discover how to draw all of that complexity in terms of a documentation of existing places? I'm assuming that's what you asked, Sam. Do you look at documents? Do you draw from books in a case like that?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. The intervention we do is usually quite minimal per project. We look at all drawing, like I was saying before, whether it's a building or an urban setting. That's what I was trying to do in Jeddah. And all Jeddah, it was quite easy because we were doing some infills. And so we're making typological infills according to the nature of building within that particular space. But when it comes to a new urban formation, we try to imagine how people used to do in the past. Like the first setting, we have enclosed it with a boundary wall, and then we worked our way through from that mosque that exists at the site all the way down to the water shore that has a certain typology, a certain formation. We have a palette of past document that we look at, and when you're basically where you're imbibed that type of process from your early formation, this comes quite instinctively on the drawing pad. It's when you want to mimic the old city and taught the modern language, you would find it difficult to put. But if you do it naturally, style it won't be any more an obstruction for you. It's because you wouldn't think of a stylistic expression. You're thinking, like I was speaking, the way the Medina was formed is from inside out. So you're putting the building blocks according to their nature and sizes. And then those building by a continuous process start to dialogue with each other. So those buildings that we put in our urban setting, they are building that complements each other. They do not juxtapose with each other. So we're not finding always landmark to be put. Actually, our formation are with no landmark. If you see at our building, it's maybe because we have worked, what I showed you is in a certain area. But if I go to other places in the Mediterranean, you wouldn't even recognize that that particular architect have done this building, because we change from location to location. And so we do not try to express our own expression to any certain form. We went to the place itself, and we do an extensive survey and the research, and we get books, whether architecture or historical, in order to understand how to interpret. It's quite a long process, but for me, it's the only process to be done working in a foreign area.
Thank you, Mohamad. How many questions do we have, Mary Beth, so we can pace ourselves?
We have 9 more questions right now.
9 questions? Okay, well, let's, if Mohamad will stay until 3 in the morning, we'd love to.
Yeah, no, I'm enjoying it.
Perfect, okay, very good. So let's do it.
The next question is from one of our alumna, Margaret Ketchum. Margaret, I've unmuted you, so you should be able to ask your question out loud. Maybe. Okay, if she can't ask her question out loud, I will ask it for her. So Margaret mentioned that your thoughts about the energy imbued in the work is quite remarkable, and she wants to know that besides the nuns, are there any women architects or craftspeople involved in your work?
I'm like Stefanos. My wife is a designer. She's an interior architect. That's why our work blends with each other. And she has, within our office, yes, we have plenty of male and female that works together. I found, that it's quite remarkable then when you look at details and mainly things related to interior, that the ladies are more equipped than men to do such task. We think more logical and try to synthesize things, whereas in the ladies' mind, they can jump from a method to another method, and they do it perfectly and very, very softly. So that combination of having the men and the women working together would make such remarkable places. There are things that we try to logic more, where the other party will make it spontaneous, and they do it perfect from the first time.
We have another question from William Womack, who remarked that your work is beautiful and very inspiring, and he wants to know if your book will be a monograph of your work and when will it be published?
Yes, this is something maybe I'll be...
Careful what you say, Mohamad, because there's going to be a run for you for this book. You have to have it soon.
Actually, I'd love to have you on. I have Abdul Wahid Al-Wakil, who wrote a preface for me, and I'd love you to be part of that. That particular book is divided into 2 parts. I have the first part, which I've called Crafting an Idea, and which is more of a bio, and where my sketches and my thoughts will be in the first part. And the second one is what I've shared with you. It's Crafting Architecture, which becomes the synthesis of what I have researched and grasped, like the idea of having this, the aura that are made when you use natural material, and have, a lot of thoughts on those things that I'll be putting as part of the bio. So but the bio and the mono are, the same, that they complement each other. So they're going to be under the same jacket. And yes, I will be having, maybe explaining in my mono, like 70 projects, but also explained in the traditional way of explaining a project. It's not descriptive, it's more informative, so people can go. The whole idea of me making a book, through my life, I'm happy that Stefanos, we've met in Madrid, and before that, two years before, I was introduced to the Inbao people, but I have worked in the area silently, like any other craftsman and builder. You can call me more of a person who work in a certain area and feel at ease with that area because I understand it. I do not jump from area to area. It takes time for me to go from one place to another. What I wanted to share with the people after, that long process is that this understanding and synthesis of doing things, but never I'm through my monograph. Although I'm going to be quite open and showing most of the things and drawing and working drawing and techniques that I use. But the whole idea is that to let people understand my methodology, but do different things in their own area. I'm not meant to expose myself as a star architect. That's why I was quite shy in exposing my work till I get a full comprehensive understanding of the nature of our built landscape. But the whole idea is just to speak about the process rather than the end of the process.
The next question is somewhat related to what happens before you get the book. Professor Alessandro Piratini had a question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, sure, Alexander.
Wonderful. So thank you so much for such an outstanding presentation. I am speechless at the quality of your work.
Thank you very much.
So I will jump right in and ask you, would you be, and no is fine for an answer, so don't be shy. Would you be willing to share some of your drawings with us, especially the section drawings? And I'll give you some context for this question. One of my courses, I try to show my students how buildings were built traditionally. And it's so hard, in my experience, to find good examples of buildings, modern buildings, built in traditional ways. And I looked at your sections and they are so convincing and yet so timeless. So if you were willing to do that, we would use them as best practices, as examples to show our students that it's still possible.
Yes, actually, Mary Beth asked me this question when I was making the presentation. I said, yes, she can feel free with Stefanos to use whatever material I have exposed to you. I can send them by PDF to Stefanos and Mary Beth, and they will share it with you. Me and Annie also different, because I have an array of projects that spans from I don't call them I have different type of project that I have worked on, still typologically correct to the area I work with. So, but yes, whatever you would like to
Alessandro,
use,
perhaps you can be in direct contact with
sure,
Mohamad and go from there.
Yes,
you might have particular. Well, between professors, you can certainly decide what you want to share. That'll be the best way to begin this dialogue, I think.
Thank you so much. My gratitude.
Thank you, Alexandro.
The next question, we have another professor, Professor Julio Cesar Perez Hernandez, is ready to speak, I think.
Hello. Thank you for such a wonderful lecture. I would like to ask you, how do you reconcile the different types of urbanism you find in Jeddah in terms of the more formal gridded areas that I could see in the map with the more informal Medina coming from the Medina? This is something that I have experienced in Andalusia, especially in Seville. I'm Cuban, by the way, and so the Islamic traditions were filtered there through Spain.
Actually, in most of my projects, I try to be logical in terms of planning strategy. Formation or deformation has reasons, and I have learned it from tradition. It's, for instance, in the mosque, even if wherever the lot is placed, you have to turn the main direction of the mosque towards Mecca. So that's where the formation starts, or when you're working in a very specific site that has angles. But most of my plans, I would rather do the formation of the plan. There are things that I have discovered while researching Isfahan, is that they're very logical in terms of planning. It's the quality of the space that change, but they're very orthogonal. I mean, that's why when I started my architectural practice, I had no problem with the tendenza movement and the rationalist architects in Europe. The problem occurred with me is when, through different process, we started deconstructing the forms and volumes just for the sake of deconstruction. This is something I have difficulty to understand. I'm usually extremely happy when I work with in a certain setting where the 3/4 of the area around me is well defined. This is where I can blend easily into the environment, because it's very easy to negate the environment around you and to do something different just for the sake of being unique. It's more difficult to blend and have your presence pass without any seeing. Usually it's I'm happy and flattered. I had to design one complex for, one extension of a complex, but I was forced to do it for a certain reason for Kenzo Tanguy. And when I presented my plans to the client and the project was done by Kenzo Tanguy, he didn't recognize the addition. So I was very flattered at that time that I was able to understand the logic of Kenzo Tanguy and do a juxtaposition without expressing any self understanding. So I don't know whether I don't know if it's the right answer for your question. I'm just speculating what you're saying.
Yeah, it's okay. I was referring to the project that you were involved with in Jeddah. The adjacent areas show different types of urbanism, which I so much love, and I could identify that of the Medina and a more organized, a more gridded one. And then I looked at your plans and I saw kind of a synthesis.
Yeah.
And so that was what my question was about.
Yeah, actually, in that particular project, we are now under, it's like a competition, and this is our first presentation. And you're right, even at that date, we're not very much happy with the periphery of the project because we embraced the new city center of Jeddah and its logic in terms of historicism of Jeddah. But yet, because it's a big area that we're working around, and the areas, although they're modern, but they have different architectural approaches to them. So it was quite difficult for us to grasp all what's happening around the periphery. And we wanted in our next development, if we get the project, to tackle each dome by itself via the adjacent configurations. So it was quite difficult. It's a vast project, and so many hands are involved working on the project. And it has some difficulty around it. I'm usually at ease when I do more of an urban architecture, where it's a couple of buildings on a very specific setting. And that's what traditional growth used to be. We never have a spontaneous city that grows in a year. It didn't happen in history. and I hope it will not happen. What we have encountered in the Gulf area is that cities were, growing like mushroom, and it's extremely foreign to it's set by the same architects. So you would go a mile and you see a monotonous architecture because they do not understand the variation on things.
Exactly.
And that's unfortunate. What's happening in the Gulf area.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We're going to do 2 more questions, if it's okay with everybody. The first, we're going to take a departure from the faculty and go to Jose Barbosa. And then after that, 1 more faculty member question from Professor Richard Economakis. So Jose. Are you there, Jose? Okay. I can read his question. So his question was, how do you harmonize the realities of construction costs, building codes, zoning ordinances for new construction? He says your architecture is wonderful, but he cannot see how it could be possible to implement your gift in the contemporary architecture and design.
There's so many questions within the question. If I would take the cost effectiveness on the buildings, that's what we have done in Jeddah Old City Center. We've designed the building according to the traditional way of doing things. And we had another engineering company who took our drawing and did it the conventional way using concrete and steel. Our buildings and their building have basically equal cost, because what's happening is that when you use concrete and you want to mimic the old architecture and interior, you'll be pouring concrete slab and then having ducts and then having a false ceiling in solid wood. So you're working twice. It will be the twice cost of any ceiling. Whereas in our case, we just have a very narrow area. We have put all the services, and the construction is actually the project itself. So we're not doing different layers. What we construct is what the people are going to see at the end, from the exterior and from the interior. So if I can get the cost right. The problematic, though, with this type of project is that you have to see the real people who can do it. In places where the traditional construction is not anymore used, it's either obsolete, you cannot do it, or it's going to be too much costly for the client, in this case, the ministry, to get people from outside and accommodate them in order to do things. But if you have them on site and they're used to that, it's quite simple and not expensive. The same with the brick. The brick itself costs a bit more, like 25% from the concrete block. But when you come in this type of area where I'm working in the Gulf, and you put that according to that consumption of AC and air conditioning, you would find that we're reducing the AC load by 80%, because it's almost like a semi-passive. We still have some ducting to put, but we're reducing the capacity of the air conditioning budget and the running cost of the project. So, this is, if we're speaking, cost effective. And not to say that concrete construction and that part of the world, deterioration starts after 50 years between concrete and steel. Luckily, if they can get to 70 years, whereas brick construction would go easily 500 years, stone will even go further if it's properly constructed. I took the cost effectiveness of doing things. If he wants to ask me the other question, I'll be happy to answer.
Go ahead and move on to Professor Richard Economakis has a question.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
yes.
Richard.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Hamouie. The presentation was marvelous. The work is incredible. Wonderful to see. I have just one simple question, and that is, how is your work being received in Lebanon and in Saudi Arabia by other professionals?
Actually, when I started this, going against current, I never thought of what the other colleagues and friends will think of my work. I was, maybe focused to do that type of architecture. I then realized that when you work with a certain group who understand what you're doing, I keep working with the same group, and that's why it's just now with my son coming into architecture, graduating and working with me, that we're thinking like the modern architect of putting a website, a logo. I never had any logo on my work. The buildings are my logo. I never put a palette and on the project that I'm working on. I just do the construction, and working in the same area. When the buildings start taking shape, they would know that that's basically me who was doing the construction. So I never worried about what the others look at me. Actually, I look at your school as a model for me when I'm faced with some difficulty and trying to conceive things. I would look at what the Al Khan are doing lovely, and what the Prince Foundation, and especially your schools. I was a bit, first of all, hesitant when Stefanos asked me to present, because I understand that I wouldn't be explaining the idea of traditionalism, because people who comes to you understand traditionalism. I thought when I graduated, I was lucky to have a teacher, Frederic Raguet, who did 2 marvelous books. It's him also who opened me this door to traditional architecture, other than my parents and my childhood. And when I graduated, I was his assistant for 4 years. But then when I started my practice, I was more alienated from the educational system. And maybe the corona is going to be an excellent timing to change most of the teaching in other universities. But I think, you're doing fine, superb, actually. In your school. You're going against current as a whole faculty. I'm just a person who's doing it with some special clients, and I have the beats of those clients, their intellect and cultured clients who knows that such design takes time to be constructed. Although if we have, not to be a disadvantage, if we have the proper builders, things can go very fast. A room with a dome will take 5 days to be constructed. Whereas if you want to have it in concrete, and the curing that comes to the concrete, because we do not use timber or steel in our area, it has to take at least 25 days to be cured. But you can do a single room covered in 5 days.
I guess Richard's question has to do more about your relationship to your colleagues who are not traditionalists, I believe.
Yeah, actually, to my colleagues, which we're friends, we don't talk much architecture. It's a different mode of living. Now with the corona, most of my friends, architects, are enjoying their nightlife, where me, I went and retreat with the family in the farm. So it's a different approach to seeing things. But time will take care of that. As historians, we have to just do what we think, what our heart pull us to do. And I think in terms of the community, it's new for them. I've followed up what Mr. Stefanos and others were doing in the States with the new urbanism. It took like 40 years to convince some, not all, with the community and the government and everybody. We're still very early. We have a couple of me working like me in this area, and I think joining you and learning the process that you have passed in the state will really helps us in our part of the world.
Well, I think we have come to the end of a most extraordinary lecture, Mohamad, and we are very thankful. It was
Thank you very
an
much.
inspiring evening for us, afternoon and evening. And I sincerely hope that it's really the beginning of our relationship and not the end of it. I think there's an awful lot to learn from you. Would love to stay close to you, and
thank you.
And we should consider beginning with Professor Pieratini, but maybe in broader ways to collaborate. There's an awful lot that we can do to support each other and to further the cause of both a traditional architecture, but also urbanism as well. So we're very, very thankful for your time, and wish you very, very well.
Thank you. I'm quite honored to present my. Thank you. I'm very honored to present my work for all of you.
We're very honored to have you. Until very, very soon. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mohamad.
Thank you. Thank you, my best. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Richard.
Thank you very much.